Well, good morning to you on this wet and windy but lovely Wednesday morning. Great to see you, and thank you for joining us for our Bible talk today. It's pretty wet and windy out there, but I hope you're warm and safe where you are, and thank you for joining us today. Well, we're in the last half of the last chapter of the second letter of Paul to Timothy. And it's probably the last, what we've got here is probably the last recorded words of Paul. So after a long and interesting and exciting and I think in every way distinguished career as a missionary, spreading the gospel and planting churches and so on, this is kind of the last words we have recorded by Paul. But without further ado, in that case, I shall read you 2 Timothy chapter 4, and I'm starting to read at verse 9. Paul's to Timothy. Do your best to come to me soon, for Demas, in love with his present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia, only Luke is still with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he's useful in my ministry. I've sent Tychicus to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak I left with Carpus at Troas, also the books, and above all the parchments. Alexander the coppersmith did me great harm. The Lord will pay him back for his deeds. You must also beware of him, for he strongly opposed our message. At my first defence, no one came to my support, but all deserted me. May it not be counted against them. But the Lord stood by me and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and save me for his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory for ever and ever. Amen. Greet Prisca and Aquila and all the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus remained at Corinth. Trophimus I left ill in Miletus. Do your best to come before winter. Eubulus sends greetings to you, as do Pudens and Linus and Claudia and all the brothers and sisters. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, as I say, the last words of Paul. And it's tempting when you hear a list of names like this just to go, yeah, whatever, nice for them, but nothing to do with us. But actually, what I would say to you is when you see this kind of thing, try if you can, with a bit of commentary, help from commentaries or Google or something, to try and dig under the surface of it. Because if you do, you find actually there's quite a lot more than you think. And that's what we're going to do with this reading this morning. And hopefully you'll find it helpful. So firstly, you've got Paul says to Timothy, do your best to come to me soon. And I think it's interesting because, as I think I said a few days ago, it kind of shows us the human face of Paul. We tend to think of Paul as being sort of very much a kind of, going out, being very firebrand and taking everybody on and being quite a solo character. Was actually Paul needs friends. And actually, as I keep saying to you before, I said many times, one of the greatest gifts God's given to us is each other. And actually Paul needed friends as well. And Paul is asking his friend Timothy to come and see him again soon. Then you get a series of names of people who were with Paul but aren't anymore. Firstly, Demas, that's probably short for Demetrius, who says he's in love with the present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Now, Demetrius actually gets quite a few mentions across the various letters of Paul and Acts and so on. But it's thought there have been various suggestions of what's happened here. The most likely one, I think, of which is that he was, but I think he kind of lost his focus. And because he'd been with them a long time, he may have drifted away or gone to somewhere a bit quieter or a bit safer or something. And I think in a sense there's kind of a message for some of us who've been Christians a long time, actually. I mean, I've been a Christian for over 40 years. I've been in Christian ministry for nearly 30. And I think what can happen after a long time is that we can get a bit bored sometimes. And I think there's a salutary reminder for us here to keep our faith alive, to keep having new challenges, to keep alive to God. But let's not let the passage of the years dissolve our faith. Let's make sure we keep focused and we keep close to God. We don't drift away like Demetrius did. And then moving on here, you've got Crescens has gone to Galatia. An alternative, a more likely of Galatia is actually Gaul, which is in France. And I think there's something interesting here that the Christian gospel, Paul has got to Rome, but but it's obviously got as far as Gaul. It's got into France. So the Christian gospel is spreading. So the gospel is spreading throughout the world. So you've got Christians who's gone to Galatia. Then he talks about only Luke is with me. And Luke here is the man that wrote Luke's gospel. And I think we haven't done Luke's gospel in our morning talks yet. We will do at some point, I'm sure. But it's interesting. It tells us really that when you hear the gospel of Luke, what you're hearing is the gospel according to a friend of Paul's. So Luke is a friend of, so a bit like Mark was a friend of Peter, we thought a few weeks ago. So Luke is very much a friend of Paul. So when you hear Luke's gospel, you're getting kind of a Pauline kind of approach to the life of Jesus. Then he goes on here. Then he asks him, and Mark. Now, interesting that Mark's asked to bring Mark with him, because in the book of Acts, on the first missionary journey, Paul and Barnabas took Mark with them. But during the journey, Mark had to come home early. And Paul and Barnabas have something of a fallout about Mark, because Barnabas thinks that he should be sort of allowed to go with him, and Paul takes a rather stronger, rather tougher, an alternative approach. And the two kind of have a bit of a fallout about it. Paul goes one way, and Barnabas goes the other. And it's interesting here that at the end of Paul's life, he says, get Mark and bring him with me, because he'll be very useful in my ministry. It's great here to see there's been some reconciliation here between Paul and Mark. And again, we tend to think of Paul as being quite a sort of an unforgiving character, really, quite strong. But actually, it shows that Paul is capable of reconciliation. And actually tells us in our ministry that it's important that people get on with each other. And if Paul can get back together and be friends with Mark, then actually so can we as well. Then he asks if he'll bring with him the cloak, the books, and the parchments. Again, I think Paul, like we all, need a bit of encouragement. And I think Paul wants to be properly clothed before winter comes. And he asks if he'll bring the cloak with him. Again, showing the human face of Paul. That, you know, Paul was not immune to human need. And actually Paul needed, you know, the parchments to read to help him in his ministry. And the cloak as well to keep him warm when the winter comes. And then he talks about Alexander the coppersmith, who did me great harm. Now, it's interesting, he doesn't want revenge on Alexander the coppersmith, who's clearly caused him a lot of trouble. He says he gives that to God. And I think it's important for us, actually, that we, as Christians, that we don't seek revenge on other people. Revenge is not something we should have in the Christian gospel. But actually, he gives that over to God. But it's quite interesting here that I think there's an idea somehow that, I remember once, I was in a church once, and I talked about, I don't like, I think it was EastEnders or something like that. And someone said to me, but you're supposed to like everybody and like everything. And I thought, actually, I don't. It's important that we are honest about people. We can still love people, but we have to be wise as serpents as well as innocent as doves. And I think Paul is reminding Timothy that this Alexander the coppersmith is a troublesome individual and he's not to be trusted. And I think it's important that we are wise, that we're not just, you know, totally kind of, you know, easygoing about everything. It's important to recognize that, as Jesus said, that we are to be wise as serpents as well as innocent as doves. And then, but at the end, he goes on to talk about how he's obviously gotten into some trouble. But he talks about the Lord supported me. The Lord stood by me and gave me strength, he says. That with all these people, and some of them have followed him, and some of them have left him, and all the kind of people, and so on. At the end, he ends up by saying, but the Lord has given me strength. And I think that's absolutely vital, that in all things, that he talks about being rescued from the lion's mouth, you know, that whatever trouble, we don't know what trouble he's been in, but quite clearly God has helped him through that. And so he's encouraging Timothy and Paul, and to himself really, to push into God at all things. And then at the end, you hear some more people like Prisca and Aquila, who've been around a long time. And so when you got Trophimus, who I think I'm right in saying was the Gentile that Paul took into the temple at Jerusalem, in about Acts chapter 20, they got him into trouble there by taking this Gentile into the temple. But Trophimus has obviously followed him before falling in at Miletus and so on. So you hear all sorts of, if you digging under the surface, you find out about some of these people and some of the background stories. And we can learn a lot about how the importance of staying with God and keeping our faith alive for the long haul, so we don't drift away like Demas did. That the importance of recognizing that the Christian gospel had spread, that it had gone as far as France and places like that. That in Luke, you hear, in a sense, the gospel according to Paul. You hear about the importance of reconciliation, that Mark, who Paul had taken issue with, that Mark, there's clearly been a reconciliation, and Paul wants Mark back again at this difficult time. And the importance also of being wise as serpents, as well as innocent as doves, and recognise that not everybody that we meet is necessarily on our side. So the importance of being wise, but allowing any vengeance or any recompense to come from God. And then, of course, the last words we have of Paul, Paul's message, Paul's life, begins and ends with grace. Paul ends by saying, "The Lord be with your spirit, grace be with you." Reminding of course, that Paul only was where he was because Jesus met him on the Damascus road. That despite how far he drifted away, Paul knew that he was what he was because by the grace, the undeserved, incredible love of God, God called him back, loved him, forgave him, and gave him purpose. And that's what Paul's life was all about. Tomorrow, we look in another book called, short book called